Hello, everyone. Thanks for checking out this special episode of Really Dicey. This is Manny, and I am here with.
I'm Scott Moore. I'm part of the 5e design team for Goodman Games, and I was responsible for the 5e D&D conversion of Caverns of Thracia, as well as some of the new material that's going to be included with it.
And I'm Bob Brickman. I am Scott Moore's DCC counterpart. I did the Dundercrawl Classics conversion for Thracia, created new content, and like Scott, I've also worked on Dark Tower and a few other of the larger conversion projects for Goodman Games.
And yes, today we're going to talk about Caverns of Thracia, one of the classic modules from a third party company that came out in 1979. I believe it was 80 pages. At the time, it was very revolutionary, and now it's coming out for Goodman Games for their original Adventures Reincarnated. I have the Temple Elemental Evil, and wow, that's such a great set of books. Expands the whole module. You get so much extra stuff, and I'm assuming is the same for this because originally this was 80 pages, and I'm assuming now it's just kind of like a retrospective look and an expansion of sorts. Am I correct?
That's correct. When we started on the conversion project, Chris Doyle, who was our manager, kind of in charge of the project, he told us when we were going through it, he goes, keep a separate list because I'm sure you'll find a bunch of stuff that you think is like, oh, you know what? There really could be a lot more said about this. This is ripe for expansion. Here's some great plot seeds. So when we were both working on the conversion, we both kind of kept a list of things that we thought could be developed or developed more or further developed. And then at the end, we kind of went through our lists and said, oh, why don't you do this one and I'll do this one and you do this one. So we've a lot of, I think, what Janelle had originally put in the original module as kind of, here's something for you to further expand upon if you decide to, turn this adventure into a campaign. We took some of those plot seeds and ran with them.
Yeah, I tend to think of the original Adventures Reincarnated line as like the college textbooks for the college history class they'd never give me, right? You have the original adventure as it was first published, there's essays about the adventure, and then there's the conversion and new material. So you can go all the way through from its original printing to its current permutation, understand the history of the product, but also just dive straight into running it. And this is an amazing adventure.
Before Goodman Games started putting this together, did you both play this module before?
I had the module, but it was not one I had played. I think like most players, I was in the, I acquired much more material for the game than I ever ran. And this was something that I had, but I had not run.
I had seen it when it was originally out, but had never had a chance to pick it up until Goodman Games did a reprint of the original, and I'd never run it, I'd never played it. I knew people were really passionate about it. When I was working on Dark Tower, people kept saying, "Hey, do Thracia next." And reading it, I understand why. And I wish I had played it. I wish I'd had a chance to run it all those years ago. It would have changed everything for me.
Same here. I've heard of the game, well, maybe in the late 80s, because back then I was really, really, really into Greek mythology. I wanted to find what I can for, back when I was playing D&D, anything I can for it. And I've heard of this, but I could never find the books back then. I don't know if they were out of print. I'm not sure where Judges Guild was at that point in history. But yeah, so I'm really glad that Goodman Games is coming out with this, and it looks like is it similar where it's going to be something that's a fifth edition book for it. Is it going to be a DCC book or is it going to be?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, there'll be, just like Dark Tower, there'll be two different versions of the product. One will be a fifth edition, one will be for DCC, and then the Monsters and Magic book will be dual statted. So there's just one book for 5e and DCC.
Okay. If I may ask, how did it happen? How did Goodman Games did Janelle Jacquet, hopefully I'm saying the last name right, well, I wrote it down just in case. Jacquet. Did Janelle Jacquet was able to speak to Goodman Games before passing to work this out? How did this come to
Janelle
be?
had worked with Joseph Goodman before on things, and they had gone. Goodman Games had gone to Judges Guild and actually purchased um, the all of Janelle's properties from Judges Guild. So this isn't a Judges Guild project. This is a Goodman Games project, and that's why there's so many. Same thing with Dark Tower, which was also one of Janelle's works. You'll see there's a whole bunch besides just Dark Tower and Caverns of Thracia, as Bob mentioned. There's Magic and Monsters of Thracia, Monsters and Magic of Dark Tower. There's some additional supplementary adventures written in Thracia and Dark Tower. And Goodman Games had a chance to just kind of expand on the Janelleverse, if you will. And Janelle was involved with the project. Unfortunately, she passed before it could come out, but she did do, like for Dark Tower, she did an art print and added some monsters for Dark Tower. And then this project was immediately following Dark Tower.
Well, and also uh, there was a before Janelle passed, both with Dark Tower and with Caverns of Thracia. Janelle was very open with her time and availability. So as I was working on conversions for both of them, I was able to say, I'm not sure what this intent was, or this is a little unclear. And so I would just reach out to Janelle. I mean, I picked her in the Secret Santa one year. I'd reach out to Janelle and she'd get right back with me. We'd chat back and forth about things. Because with any conversion project, it's very, very important to maintain the original voice, the author's voice, right? You're buying Caverns of Thracia because it is a Janelle Jaquays product, not because it's a Bob Brickman product. I've done the stats, I've done the conversion, and both of us have done flavor text and things of that nature. But it's very important that this is Janelle's work, and she was always available to us to make sure if we had any questions that we were on the right path.
What was your, if I may ask, what was your first impressions? What did when you looking at it, did you understand like, okay, I see why this was such a big deal when this came out in
It's
1979?
the scales fell away from my eyes, Manny. This just reading this adventure made me a better game designer. There was so much that I learned going through this adventure, and it's changed the way I look at a lot of things. It's absolute brilliance, and now having been running a campaign playtest for it, it's been really fascinating to watch how history plays a very large part in the adventure. And in most cases, if history plays a part in an adventure, there's 4 or 5 pages to read about the history. And Caverns has a page, but the rest of that history is revealed in play by what the PCs are putting together from what they see and who they talk to. There's so many things in here that Janelle did that were just revolutionary. It's a master class in dungeon design.
Yeah, I loved the fact that, and Bob kind of said this. I'm just using different words, but this was not just a dungeon crawl adventure. This was a campaign setting, kind of disguised as an adventure. This was not the kind of adventure that you would sit down with your friends and play for 4 or 5 hours and you'd be done. This was weeks to months worth of material with tons of history and plot seeds for other things that could be explored. That if you were a creative GM, you could this could be the entire basis for your campaign, Thracia and the areas around it. And typically, I mean, we're talking late 70s when this came out, so D&D was relatively a new game to the masses. You typically had in an adventure, in a published adventure, you had a short background story. Hey, here's who the bad guy is. Here's what he's doing. He lives in this cave. Go fight all the monsters and then fight him at the end. Um, this was very different. There were factions and groups of humans and non-humans and politics between the groups. And I said there was plenty of opportunity for that whole the enemy of my enemy is my friend kind of thing. Well, we don't know who this group is, but we do know these folks, and if we ally with them, we can probably get rid of these evil cultists or whatever. And it was such a detailed sandbox, which sounds almost contradictory, but there was so much detail and so much to play with. You could go off and explore and do what you wanted to as a player, and it wouldn't necessarily be outside the scope of adventure. It's not like there was one path you were supposed to take through this thing. The whole environment was kind of outfitted for you, and you can go any direction you wanted.
If I may ask, uh, what did you add more to it? For example, with the Temple of Elemental Evil, I love that there was now stuff between Hamlet and the temple. Is there something like that as well for this?
Go
Uh,
ahead and start,
we
Scott.
we took much advantage of the opportunities Janelle presented us. So in the original adventure, Thracia is essentially a lost city in the jungle, and the adventure kind of starts with a map that gives you the western side of the city, which is adjacent to a swamp on the west. And amongst the ruins of the buildings, there are several passages that lead underground. Underground, there are 4 levels plus one sublevel of caverns underneath the city. There's a few encounters in the ruins of the city, and then those 4.5 levels underneath the ground. So, in compiling our lists of, hey, wouldn't it be interesting to expand on this? We ended up detailing out the rest of the city, so everything east of the original maps. So we detailed out the rest of the ruined city, and then to back out from that a little bit, the city of Thracia exists on an island known as Thracia. So we detailed the island of Thracia, and then backing out from that a bit, Bob designed the entire archipelago, which the island lives within or sits within. So we took the campaign disguised as an adventure and expanded it even more into a campaign setting. And then kind of going small scale again, there is a river on the second level, and this is part of the second level behind me. There's a river on the second level which connects to a spot on the fourth level, and there's a swamp adjacent to the city. And we both kind of said that's an awful lot of water. There's probably stuff that connects those together, and there might be an opportunity for an entire water level in there somewhere. So Bob kind of put together the water level of Thracia, and in addition to that, there was a bunch of, I want to say, I'll say smaller things, much smaller in scope than that. That there was enough of a hint given about something here that, hey, we can write a small story about this, or we can write something up that would tie it to something else. So there was a bunch of little expansions we did, but the ones I mentioned were pretty much the big expansions we added to it.
Well, and there's the case of, like, famously, there is a room missing. There is
102.
Yep, it is missing in the manuscript. It says, oh, maybe the designer overlooked it, maybe it's intentional, and so 102 now has its own room complex. But because beyond levels and sub-levels, there are room complexes which are their own little miniature levels. So we added level 2A and sub-levels. We added 102 and that room complex. The Starry Archipelago is huge. It's filled with adventure seeds, and actually the first DCC adventure coming out to support Caverns of Thracia, Beneath the Isle of Serpents, is set in one of those archipelago locations.
And if anyone hearing about this for the first time, um, how would you describe the main plot for Caverns of Thracia? Would you say it is? I mean, I've heard that it's definitely inspired by Greek and Roman mythology. Would you say that's true?
Yes, I mean, so the Thracians, historically, the Thracians weren't really the Thracians. That's the name the Greeks gave their civilization because they didn't know what else to call them. So there is this wonderful mix of Greek mythology and history and Thracian prehistory that layers together with the history of this kingdom of Thracia. And it's like Scott was saying, it's more of a campaign setting in a book as opposed to just an adventure. It's not just a go in, get the MacGuffin, kill the bad guy, and get out sort of thing. There are factions to deal with, but at the end of the day, the deeper you go, the greater the rot you discover beneath Thracia, and you not only learn about why the kingdom fell, but you are able to confront those evils which did it. So it builds and builds on kind of an epic scale as opposed to just a 16 pager.
And one thing that I try to do, especially with mega dungeons, is try to keep an interest. The first 10 games are always great, but when you get to maybe the 20s, there might be I come across like exhaustion issues. Like we get close, but sometimes if the story doesn't change much, or if the environment doesn't change much, it seems like we're just doing the same stuff over and over again. Um, uh, does Caverns of Thracia try to uh, can that help game masters? Is there anything involved in Caverns of Thracia to help game masters fight against that type of exhaustion?
I think so. And I may be biased, but it amazes me that so early in the history of D&D, there was a mega dungeon that I thought did that so well in Caverns of Thracia. And I say that because and I don't mean to pick on other works, but like Undermountain, if you know the history of Undermountain, that was Hallister's dungeon. Hallister created it and populated it with monsters. So when you're on level 1, it's a dungeon created by Hallister populated with monsters. When you're on level 17, it's a dungeon created by Hallister populated with monsters. This was continual excavations underneath the city with settlements, individual settlements overrun by different types of creatures, humans and non-humans, and there's kind of conflicts at the borderlands between the different types of creatures and like the factions I was mentioning before. When you go from level 2 to level 3, you're not going to see the same sorts of creatures. You're not going to see the same sort of environments, because level 3 is controlled predominantly by a much different faction than you're going to find on level 2. And all these creatures are aware of each other, and there's some conflict at kind of the borders between them. So you never quite know what the next level or the next area of this level is going to bring. And I think that keeps it interesting. And the fact that there's different factions in control of different areas also makes it interesting. It could be that this is definitely not a place where we can stay and rest. However, we seem to get along pretty good with those characters we found on first level. We might be able to go back there and find a safe place to stay. So there's a lot of variance between the levels and even the areas within levels that I think keeps it interesting.
Well, and to build on that, I think that it helps that each level is truly its own environment. The first level is dungeons. The second level is mostly caverns. The third is this weird, eerily fey forested area with the ruins of a castle, and the fourth level is the castle and the dungeons beneath. Um, so and I've been running Caverns of Thracia now since I think July of last year for the campaign playtest group, which tells you you're going to get a lot of play out of this. And I think that it's helped that I've kept in mind it's an old school adventure, and so I've been running it the old school way, which is you go down, you adventure, and when the session is done, everyone leaves as long as there's a way out, goes back to base camp and rests. And so the next adventure, they're not saying, okay, well, we left off in this room, and so we're going to go back out in the hall and we're going to go towards those beastmen. It's all right, guys, it's time to break camp. Do we want to go back into those caverns, or do we want to check out that weird forest? And so that gives them those options that are already available within the adventure.
What has been some of your challenges in converting this to not just to 5e but also to DCC?
I think probably one of the and I'm calling back to one of Bob's statements a little bit. There were some creatures and some monsters that are very different. The way you would write them up in original D&D is very different from the way they would be in 5e. You definitely need I'll say a more complete stat block in 5e than some of the little brief descriptions you can get away with in the original version. So trying to create a 5th edition conversion of a first edition monster that maybe only appeared in this adventure, and as Bob said, trying to keep it true to Janelle's intent and Janelle's original vision was something that was, I don't know if I would say challenging, but it was something that I was kind of focused on in trying to keep that um, original author's vision as I tried to make a playable version of whatever this creature or obstacle was in the 5th edition language.
Well, when I was talking to Janelle's widow Rebecca at GaryCon, one of the things that she mentioned was Janelle was really excited that we were doing conversion, but we weren't mucking around with things and trying to create balance where none was ever intended. And sometimes that's, you're like, wow, okay, maybe that's a little tough, or maybe that's a little easy, but you kind of push back against your own instincts because, again, this isn't a Bob Brinkman adventure. This is a Janelle Jaquays adventure. And so, there's times where if a monster already exists in DCC, that's what I'm supposed to use, and that can fluctuate the difficulty level a little bit. But when things were less vanilla, and trust me, Janelle was really big on variants of creatures. It's all about, okay, well, so here's the lizard man as written in D&D, and here it is in DCC, and they're fairly close to one another. And then there's the lizard men that Janelle has that also do this, and so it's now, all right, so I need to take 3 or 4 other types of lizard men and create those and get those in there, fill in those gaps, as it were. I will say the one thing about the conversion that excites me the most, probably be more so than Scott, actually, for all of the conversions that I've done so far from 5e and from D&D to DCC, I was always given the 5e conversion to work from and build from. And we didn't do that for Thracia. Scott and I were essentially handed the module and said, go. And so I'm really excited about reading Scott's version because I'm really looking forward to seeing how he handled the flavor text for the rooms versus how I did it, and what nuances from Janelle's writings that he chose to bring forward in particular places and others. It's all Janelle's work, but how the focus is going to change between the two of us, I am really excited to see.
That's funny you say that because I did look at the new material that was generated. I saw the map of the archipelago, but I didn't read. Chris did the conversion for some of the new DCC content that you did to 5th edition. So I didn't look at any of it because I wanted some surprises when I got my copy. But, Janelle was, I think, very, very aware, very conscious of the fact that everything you encounter is not something you're just supposed to fight and defeat. So yes, if you're a group of 4 or 6 first level characters and you come upon a war party of 20 other individuals, those 20 individuals are going to be there in Bob and my conversion. And sometimes the best thing is to run away or hide. That's why you have those abilities.
Yeah, sometimes come back when you're like 3rd or 4th level.
Yeah, and maybe it's a little bit easier then, but it should be pretty obvious when you're first level and there's you and 5 of your buddies, that group of 10 over there with the weapons and wearing the plate armor, maybe this is not your time to encounter them.
War bears.
Or if you really like making characters, go ahead and encounter them, and next week you can play your new character.
So just to be clear, there are 2 books coming out. one for Dungeon Crawl Classics, one for Fifth Edition, but same adventure. Um, I know some of the older adventures, older dungeons tend to be very deadly. Now, Fifth Edition tends to have a um, this reputation of being very how should I say it? Like their adventures are not as deadly as the
Less
older ones.
lethal.
Yes. Did you both have a problem trying to, I guess, make the tone? Because I assume in Dungeon Crawl Classic you didn't have to do much to make it deadly. Dungeon Crawl Classics is deadly in itself. It's a very wild and
Well,
dangerous world.
DCC, I think, has a reputation for being incredibly deadly because of like the funnel adventure where you start with 4 0 levels, and if you're lucky, you end with one. Once you start getting up in levels, it's certainly longevity starts building itself in. But Caverns of Thracia was not written as a killer dungeon. It's certainly not Tomb of Horrors. It's not Crypt of the Devil Lich.
Yeah.
It's not meant to grind your PCs to dust. There's certainly opportunities for that, right? It is not. It is a. It's an adventure that you need to think about. You can't just sort of traipse in and expect everything is going to be fine, because if you approach it that way, it most certainly won't be. But if you're really thinking about what you're doing and staying on top of the challenges, it's not insurmountable. It's fun. It's going to leave your players are going to come back. Their characters are going to be beaten, bloodied, and on their last hit point, and they're going to be having the times of their lives.
Oh, same thing, Scott.
Yeah, that was yes. It was beautiful, Bob.
Although
It's like you're a writer.
Warbears killed two people or two characters during the playtest. The players are fine, but the characters.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. Yes, may kill characters. Players should be safe through the entire adventure.
Well, speaking of monsters, so one of my favorite NPCs slash monsters, depending on the settings, adventure situation, are Minotaurs. And I've always been a fan of Minotaurs ever since Dragonlance, when they introduced
Kaz.
this Romanesque setting, and when I talk to other fans of monsters and Dragonlance, they have mentioned to me that Caverns of Thracia, the Minotaur King, in their opinion, is the first example of a complicated villain, especially a Minotaur. What are the villains like in these books?
Layered and nuanced. I mean, certainly there's the Minotaur King, and he rules over his subterranean kingdom, at least what's close to him. As Scott has mentioned, right, the further out you get, the more factionism comes into play. But there's also the followers of the Dark One, Thanatos, the god of death. There's a number of characters that would qualify as the villain, or at least a villain, for the level they're on or beyond. And
It's
each
like we're
one of
sharing the
those,
same brain. This is amazing.
yeah, each one of those has their own motivations. There is an ancient priest of Thanatos that has been in suspended animation for something like 1,000 years. And there's a potential for the party to accidentally wake him up, which my party did, Scott, in the second session.
Nice.
And they promptly ran away because they were first level, and they came back, and they're like, well, he's just sort of cleaning up this temple. He just wants to get it going. All right, we can cozy up to this guy. We can. So you can hack and slash and murder hobo your way through this adventure like any other, and if that's what you want to do, you're going to have a great time doing it. But if you want to actually stop and have conversations with some of these people, there are definite motivations that drive these villains. They're not paper thin cutouts that just are stamped evil, and that makes for some real depth of character that, again, you don't have a 5-page handout and explanation that goes through all of these NPCs. you learn about it in media res, right? You learn about this priest's motivations when you find him. You learn more about the Minotaur King when you come across him, and everything you need to know is either in the book or has been put together by the players as they've been going. It's in a lot of ways the adventure is kind of cooperative in that fashion. As players pick up on things, you as a judge are going to lean into them, and it makes for a fantastic campaign.
Hmm. Um,
It's interesting that you could almost at any given point along the PC's progress, they might be thinking, "Oh, we know who the big bad is. This is going to be the big bad of the adventure." And then as they advance a little bit further, "Oh no, there's a different big bad of charge of this other faction, and now he's the big bad." So it kind of depends on where you are in the dungeon, who you've encountered, and which kind of faction you're currently opposing, who's going to be your primary enemy or the leader of your enemies at any given moment.
And at the end of the day, are the PCs the big bad? I mean, the Minotaur King is not rolling armies up and across the countryside trying to conquer everything in his path. He is ruling his kingdom.
mhm.
So there is really so much ambiguity that you can take it in any direction you want. And the villains or major NPCs are right there for you to lean into.
It's a great adventure for a DM, and you can tell me if you've I don't know if you've had this experience since you've been running more of it than I have, but it seems like it's a great adventure for the PCs to run around and do whatever they want and provide the opportunity for the DM to say, here are the repercussions of your actions. Because there's so many different directions you can go in and say, well, we're going to keep these folks as allies, or we're going to keep those folks as enemies, and okay, well, however you want to handle it, PCs, and this is the result of those actions.
Yep.
Being that you looked at this and also you looked at the Dark Tower, what would you say? Well, I shouldn't assume. Did you see any like themes in Janelle's work? By any chance, there like uh, certain points that she wanted to make, or was it just a game?
I think I think Janelle's love of history and mythology came through in both works, um, paired with her love and interest in tabletop RPGs. Because although in between both Dark Tower and Thracia, there was stuff based on human cultures and historic, tales from mythology and stuff like that. There was also these are the standard tabletop monsters of Dungeons and Dragons. This game that I've loved since college when I discovered it in the '70s. That she kind of mixed those elements together, and she seemed to have a lot of fun doing it, and didn't care that we're talking. I'm taking a real Earth culture and I'm taking a pure fantasy culture and merging them together because that seemed to be her interest or something that was fun for her. And it seems to me not a ton of people did that at the time. You had stuff that was, obviously this is kind of like Roman architecture or whatever, but to take, real world Earth cultures and pure monster cultures and say, wouldn't it be cool if they were all together in the same space? I think that's something she did, and she seemed to have a lot of fun with it.
Uh, Building on that, I would say that in some ways, and keeping in mind, she wrote Dark Tower and Caverns of Thracia in the span of a year. I mean, which is
Overachiever.
mind blowing. But she kind of took Dungeons and Dragons back a half step, right? Because I mean, we had historical wargaming, which birthed kind of fantasy wargaming, which gave birth to Blackmoor and to Dungeons and Dragons, and so we were in this world of pure fantasy. And Janelle early on realized that fantasy is great, but there is so much to draw on from human history. And so she took that and started building from that. And while that certainly seems like that seems obvious to anyone today. I mean, we can hop on Wikipedia and we can look up any ancient culture that we're interested in and go down a rabbit hole. But those opportunities didn't really exist. You had to go through the card catalog. You had to dig through reference sections. And Janelle loved history and she loved mythology. And so she wove it in because, hey, we sort of missed this step when we started creating dungeons. Let's bring this in. You don't have to create everything from whole cloth. There's really neat stuff out there that we can bring in. And so that is certainly a key theme. Uh, she was certainly big on factions that aren't always exactly what they seem. You see a lot of that in Dark Tower. You see some of that in Thracia. Her design ethos, right there is always more than one way through, and some of them are just, I'm going to pound a spike here, tie a rope, and rappel down and see what's at the bottom. So she designed games differently, and again, a lot of the things that she did then were groundbreaking and we take for granted today. But her her themes of good and evil aren't necessarily always good or evil. That NPCs you encounter should be more than a stat block. They should be fun to interact with. They shouldn't just be someone to talk to or to kill. There needs to be something really neat. There is a giant gnome in this adventure. I'll say that again. There is a giant gnome in this adventure, and he is probably the favorite NPC of my playtest group. They love interacting with him. They're constantly bringing him provisions and talking to him because he's something different and he's more than numbers on a page. And that was really Janelle's big thing.
The artwork, the so it has the, is the artwork. Well, I'm assuming the artwork has expanded in these two books. Is this very similar to what we've seen in the Temple of Elemental Evil and the other reincarnated books?
Yes. Yeah, there is a horde of Goodman Games artists who have been working tirelessly creating things for Caverns of Thracia. Because of course, all of the original art is in the book because the entirety of the initial adventure of its original printing is in the book. And so we have the opportunity for remaking the maps and new art and updated art and pieces for the new material. Like all of the original adventures reincarnated, there's going to be some really beautiful stuff in there. I mean, from like, I love the DCC cover. I love the D&D cover too, the blue and the original art. But DCC has a cover by St. Julian, and there's going to be two covers that are embossed with Minotaur that are on Minotaur hide, right? I mean, if there's an opportunity to put in new cool art, Goodman Games is putting in new cool art.
Yeah. And I haven't seen all the artwork. I haven't seen all the new artwork for Caverns of Thracia, but I did see before Dark Tower came out. I saw a bunch of the new artwork for Dark Tower. It's going to be on the same caliber. And when I showed that artwork before it came out, when I showed that artwork to my playtesters, they're like, "Oh, I know exactly where that is. I remember that scene. I remember that." So it's very. I'm sure it's going to be very evocative and very identifiable to people who either have read the original adventure or for players once they start to go through it.
Yeah, and big pieces and little details. I mean, if you look at those foil covers, I absolutely adore the fact that the O in "of" is a skull. It's a small little detail, but I love it. There's just so many great artists involved, and I haven't seen a lot of the art, but what I've seen, I've really been blown away.
Yeah, this is beautiful. I it looks great like this, and I'm curious to see how it's going to look in your hand, and I'm wondering what how it shines.
It's gonna.
Um,
My understanding is it's textured. I can't wait to feel it in my hands. Yeah, that's. Oh yeah,
so yeah,
Minotaur hide, the next big thing.
so yeah, let's talk about the backer kit. There are so many things coming out for this backer kit. There are, let's see, they're coming back with the DCC annual, which is I love that it's coming out with that great cover. Um, it got more stuff for 5e. Dice, so much dice.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
and then and you bring this back out as well. So yeah, yeah, share with us what is this? Share us this plan.
Oh, it is an embarrassment of riches, Manny. It really is. I mean, first of all, you want to talk about dice? Let's talk about dice for a second. Um, so when Joe did the X Crawl dice set, he wanted, rather than acrylic dice, he wanted multicolor, which meant resin dice, which meant Tom at Impact Miniatures had to have all new molds made because acrylic and resin dice use different molds. And so because of that, we have this opportunity for like those beautiful marbled dice and a dice with bits of other colors and foil running through them and inclusions. So for the DCC fans, these are sets of dice unlike any we've ever been offered, and they're going to be made available in DCC and in D&D style, right? So if you're a D&D player who doesn't want a D14, and come on, if you're a D&D player, you want a D14. You don't know what you're going to do with it, but you want it. You know it.
That's fair.
Um, they're gorgeous dice. Yes, we get the DCC annual. There's been one, but it's the annual. The DCC annual getting reprinted. The new reprint for Sailors on the Starless Sea. Uh, these are things that people have been wanting back in print for a while, and they've been wanting new editions. For Sailors, there's the foil cover, but now in a hardback form. So there's some really cool stuff beyond Thracia, right? Beyond the Janelaverse that's coming for DCC players.
So the dice, Sailors of the Starless Sea foil version, the DCC annual foil version, is that like add-ons? Is that the
Yes.
how they?
Yeah,
There's going to be a Caverns of Thracia T-shirt. There's the dual-statted Men and Monsters book that Bob and I did. There is the Sacrificial Pyres of Thracia is a 5e separate 5e adventure that I wrote. Bob, you wrote a Dungeon Crawl
beneath the
Classics
Isle of
adventure.
beneath the Isle of Serpents.
Um,
There's also, was it Hell Pits of Night
oh
Fang,
yes, Hell Pits of Nightfang. We forgot to mention.
which
It
is
was actually another Janelle adventure from way back in the days of Judges Guild that was part of the acquisition of Janelle's properties from Judges Guild. And I believe Chris Doyle did the conversion of that, and that's going to be published as a separate adventure as well. There's going to be both a DCC version of that and I believe a 5e version of that adventure as well.
Yep, the author Zog did the DCC version of it, and that's an adventure that was originally written for RuneQuest.
Okay. That
And
I forgot.
so
When you say that, I remember that. I had forgotten that.
yeah, there is a lot of great stuff. I love the fact that we're getting some really nice reprints of like the annual and Sailors on the Starless Sea, but the main thrust of the Caverns of Thracia project is and continues to be the work of Janelle. And so I had no idea that there was another Janelle adventure that was being converted until I saw it pop up in my email from Goodman Games. Hey, look, this is coming out with a Kickstarter. It's like, oh my God, this is fantastic. And it's essentially Original Adventures Reincarnated like 9.5.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it is an embarrassment of riches. I've said it before, I'll say it again.
And the Monsters and Magic book is that like just a conversion book? Is it just new
It's
sets of
all new
monsters?
material. Yeah, material that's not in Caverns of Thracia, but it's kind of a lot of the monsters are Greek mythology themed, so they kind of they fit well with Caverns of Thracia, and a lot of the magic items are similar as well, drawn from mythology. So, if you're
And
looking to expand your campaign with stuff of the appropriate flavor, it's a great source book.
Yeah, I mean, working on that was a lot of fun. I mean, everyone thinks a dryad is a dryad is a dryad. Well, dryads are technically, the spirits you find in oak trees, and so for dungeon denizens, there is this entire range of tree spirits, and so there were three different types of centaurs in Greek mythology. There was a number of different types of giants in Greek mythology. Let's bring these in. Let's get these statted. Let's make magic items that fit this world, that draw on that mythology that Janelle had already been pulling from, and expand on it so that uh, as a judge or a GM, if your characters need an XP bump before they go down to level 4 of Thracia, and they need a side adventure, you've got the tools to throw something at them and create a side adventure, or pick up one of the prepared ones. And since the book has both the DCC and 5e stats, that also gives you a few more options, in my opinion, because there's things in D&D that don't really convert well, one for one to DCC and vice versa, right? I'm looking at you, monster templates. um, and so, and there's layer actions and things like that. But if you were looking at the 5e monster and you're like, well, I don't know if this is beefy enough, you can look at the DCC stats and go, oh, well, it handles this a little bit differently, or it also has this, so I'm going to add that. So you've got the pre-made stuff for your system, but right on the next page or beneath it is the other system, and it's more ideas for me to draw on. I think no matter what game system you play, the more ideas you're exposed to, the better you're going to be as a judge. It's a great book.
And is there more announcements coming up soon? Is there even more things?
Man, I don't know. I mean, there's a lot.
Isn't this enough?
Uh,
But
I
one
mean, I
one
know
thing,
there's plenty on the horizon for Goodman Games that hasn't been announced.
yeah.
Um, I don't know if there's anything more coming for Thracia. I don't think there is. But then again, I didn't know about Hell Pits of Nightfang until it was announced. So we do tend to work in kind of a compartmentalized fashion, I suppose, more so than I had originally thought. But I think at this point, this late in the game, other than whatever Joe is got in mind for stretch goals and additional stretch goals, because Joe creates great stretch goals. But for the most part, I mean, he wants to deliver this by the end of the year.
Hmm.
I will say, I think from memory anyway, we talked about all the kind of additional material that was created for this backer kit launch of Caverns of Thracia. But I did mention before, this was not done under license from Judges Guild.
Right.
This was a purchase of the intellectual property from Judges Guild. So that means the door is potentially always open for more Dark Tower and Caverns of Thracia content down the road. So
Oh
if you'd
yeah,
like to see more, make sure you pledge.
I told Michael Curtis that I'm going to write Caverns of Thracia content until he tells me to stop, and then I'm going to write more adventures out of spite. I love the setting and the environments. So this is something that if the community really backs this and really champions it, you're going to see a lot more for it. And I think that's great. I think it's a wonderful way for Janelle's legacy to carry forward for new audiences and continue to resonate.
Hmm. If I were to run this game at a con and you both were there, you both were playing, what characters would you roll up?
That's everyone I have ever played D&D with for the past 5 years is shouting he would play a ranger. He would play a ranger. He always plays a ranger. I'd probably, after a lot of contemplation, I would probably have to say a ranger. I tend to not be. I've played everything pretty much in my time, but I'm not a big fan of heavy spell casting anymore. So I tend to go with ranger, rogue type characters.
Now, I'm known for my preference of playing dwarves in both D&D and in DCC, and certainly I could play a dwarf in Caverns of Thracia and there's plenty of little hooks for the special dwarven abilities. But I think I would more likely play, for DCC at least, a cleric, because not only are there the kind of there's the religious undertones that you're going to discover. And with DCC, since our skill system is essentially, well, if it fits your background or your character class, it's trained. Otherwise, it's untrained. It's pretty streamlined. There's a lot of things that clerics can pick up on that aren't necessarily crucial. I mean, if a cleric doesn't pick up on the fact that the dark one is Thanatos, it is not going to break the adventure, but adds to that flair and adds to the feel of it. I mean, there's hooks in it for most of the character classes for DCC to discover and unwrap their own little things, but the the tombs and the statuary and the forgotten gods, I really think that playing as a cleric, it would be a whole lot of fun.
Hmm. Okay. And when does this come out? When does the backer kit become available?
It launches a week from today, I think. Actually, well, today recording time anyway. I believe it launches on the 25th.
Sounds about right. I don't recall off the top of my head, but I'm going to support Bob in that.
And if I'm wrong, we'll go down
And if we're
together.
both
But I'm
wrong, we're
pretty
both
sure
wrong together. But around that, within
yeah,
a
I'm
month
pretty
of
sure.
that time.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it goes up. I know it goes up next week. I'm fairly confident that it launches on the 25th. And launch time for these sort of crowdfunding is always exciting to begin with. So whenever it launches, I'm just going to be there watching, refresh, 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 refresh.
Is there anything else about this project that I haven't mentioned about that you wanted to share?
I will say that whether you play 5e, whether you play DCC, or you don't play any of them, whether you currently game or you don't, Caverns of Thracia is still worth picking up. And it's worth picking up because it's part of our communal history in a way. Dark Tower famously made the top 30 Dungeons and Dragons adventures of all time. It was the only non TSR adventure to make the list. And I maintain that Caverns of Thracia didn't make the list because the people making it would have been embarrassed to have a non TSR adventure at number one. I think this is one of the greatest gaming adventures ever written. It's fun to read. It's it's amazing to play, but there's just so much there that if you love gaming, if you love picking up, history of Dungeons and Dragons books and the games we played, and watching documentaries like Dreams in Gary's Basement, even if you don't play, you want this book because this adventure was so important. And Janelle as a creator, the first licensed zine for Dungeons and Dragons. She reached out and got the okay from Tim Cass to do the Dungeoneer. Without her, the third party landscape would have looked completely different, and our entire community would look really different. So being able to read through her work, being able to see how things were done then and how they're done now, and see that other than some numbers on the page, they're not that drastically different, and we're all still having a great time and we're having a lot of fun. That is what I would carry away from this.
I will go, not that I disagree with any of that, but I will go in a different direction. And I will say one of the things I really kind of loved during this project was working with Bob, who obviously also had an affection for the original source material. And it was kind of neat to go through this project and occasionally toss ideas back and forth. And even though we were never in the same room collaborating on things, just occasionally, comparing notes and tossing an idea back and forth. It was a lot of fun to create or work on this work of art essentially with somebody else who was as inspired as I was by the original work.
Back early, there's an early backer patch for Caverns of Thracia.
Oh, that's right. We forgot to mention that. Good memory.
Yeah. So if you've got your gamer battle vest, you definitely want an early backer patch for Caverns of Thracia.
We mean patch, like something to be sewn on
You
patch?
betcha.
Or? Oh,
Oh
okay.
yeah, Goodman Games loves stickers, patches, and things like that. And there is going to be an early backer patch for Caverns of Thracia.
I'll have to
Oh,
make sure.
awesome.
I have to make sure I tell my scout troop who play tested the adventure, because you know how scouts are with patches.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Well, again, thank you both. And viewers, thank you for watching. Stay safe out there. We'll see you next time.
Be inspired.